Wes, thank you so much for coming on our show today. I'm so glad to talk to you.
Pleasure being here.
I'd like to start off with a question about identity and privacy. These two things seem to me to be unconsolable. Is that true?
It is not true, and I'm glad you put it that way because I want to hit that head on and show you that it is it's not, in fact, the case. So let me just start with a metaphor, an example in the physical world where we have imperfect accountable anonymity. That's what we're looking for, right? Accountable anonymity. So think about your car's license plate. Anyone can see it, making you accountable for what happens on public roadways, but no one gets to know the identity of the driver or owner unless there's been an incident. So a fender bender, some other kind of incident, or if the cops suspect you of transporting some illegal material. Otherwise, your identity is not known. You can have as many cars as you want, provided you have the budget. And disclosure of the identity of the driver of one doesn't disclose the identity of the driver of the other. Now, online, we can emulate that imperfect system with much greater, I won't say perfection, but excellence. You can get much closer. Digital identity certificates don't carry identity information in them. So they're like your car's license plate. They make you accountable in public spaces, public digital spaces. But in the case of our identity certificates, we call them license plate certificates. In the case of our identity certificates, your identity is disclosed only at the direction of a court order, and not just any court order. You have one person on this planet who has access to your identity information. That is your attestation officer. If your attestation officer is presented with a court order, he or she will evaluate the court order. If it comes from some dictator, using some kangaroo court, he or she will toss it in the trash. It has to be a valid, legitimate court order. Let's say you have defrauded someone or defamed someone in public, and they need to they need to know who you are to take action. In that case, your attestation officer will disclose to the complaining party, not to the public, not to anyone, but the person named in the court order. This is the name, this is the identity of the person who has offended you or cheated you or whatever. And I might add that, we've proven the concept at Delphi. We were in the social media business in the 80s. I created the world's first online encyclopedia, which was a terrible business model, but it morphed into social media fairly quickly and saved our bacon with a sustainable business model. Anyway, we would get visits from the DEA occasionally. And the DEA would say, we need to know the name of this user. Whoever has this username, we need to know who it is. And well, to bring a court order. They say, well, we're the DEA. Do we need a court order? We say, yeah, you need a court order. And if it's a valid court order, we will disclose the identity of the person in question. The web, I won't say the internet, but the web disrupted things. You're probably aware of the famous Peter Steiner cartoon, dog telling a friend the internet, no one knows you're a dog. That anonymity came with total lack of accountability, and that's why we have problems.
So
License plates system implemented properly, and I'm be happy to talk for hours about the implementation, the proper implementation of that, because it's not simple. We can deliver true accountable anonymity.
So I wanna take a step back and think through how this license plate solution would impact real issues that we're coming across on our day-to-day basis. Give us an example, whichever you want, around if it could be fraud or phishing or any kind of these issues that we're facing today on the web. How would this actually look? What would a person do in this process that would prevent, let's say, this evil from happening?
Well, you're familiar with digital signatures.
And keep it as simple as possible to kind of bring
Okay,
our
well,
audience with us.
you can if you have a what's traditionally known as a key pair in your device, your phone, your laptop, whatever. You have this pair of very large numbers, mathematically related numbers. One is public, and the other is not only secret, but it never leaves your device, and that's a key. You use the secret one of those to digitally sign anything. Into one form of digital signature is authentication, to log into something, to sign an email. Now, all our email protocols have accommodated digital signatures for decades, but no one ever uses them. But it's built in, it's there. All we need is to have these two big numbers. And most importantly, they need to be that your attestation officer needs to be able to say, yeah, I checked this person's identity claims and they are who they claim to be. You use the secret number to digitally sign anything, an email message. So we fret about, to use an example, practical example, phishing attacks. You cannot educate people to detect phishing attacks. It does not work. I don't care what anybody says, and I approve. Here's my proof. I go to the RSA security conference and the AGC security conference every year, and occasionally the Black Hat conference. And I will be having a beer, alcoholic or non, with a CISSP. That's a security expert. And I have to admit to being a bit disingenuous here, because I will say in the course of our conversation over a beer, I'll say, hey, I have to admit, I've clicked on a bad link. I've clicked on a bad attachment. Over 50% of the time, the person I'm talking to, the security expert, will say, yeah, I know, I've done the same thing. This is the person who's training the masses how to recognize a phishing attack. So tell me how that is going to work if the person who's if the knowledgeable person falls victim to the phishing attack. Answer, it doesn't work.
I will admit that as a self-proclaimed security expert, king of the lemurs, whatever. Maybe 5-10 years ago, I could look at an absolute majority of these attacks and be like, okay, something's wrong here. The website, the address, but nowadays it's getting so good. I just don't know anymore.
Right. Well, there's a solution. Here is the solution: digitally signed emails.
So I want to
signed by a measurably reliable identity certificate, or the PEN, we call it personal endorsement number, or otherwise known as a private key of the signer. So it's not as though you can't cheat somebody through email, but you can't do it and be anonymous, you can't do it and be unaccountable.
Mhm. So I want to ask some relatively simple questions. What prevents me from using somebody else's identity?
Because it's in your the pen, that private large number is in your device, and one assumes that your device requires you to use a biometric to release the private key, the pen, for use. So someone else gets your phone. um, I mean, your biometric isn't going to work, your facial image or your fingerprint. We are There are two right ways and one wrong way to use biometrics. And the right way is in your device, right? One of the two right ways is in your device to allow your private key to be used to sign something. Or your pair of large numbers can be used for digital signing, for authentication, and for um, uh, decryption key management. And so those are the three uses, and you're totally in control of them because you can't use that pen, that privacy pen that I referred to. Again, it's the secret large number. You cannot use it without the biometric.
So now I can only give, one identity. What's preventing me, or what's the mechanism for me getting 100 identities and just
Nothing.
keeping scrolling through them?
Absolutely nothing.
Okay.
Now, the thing is, are those 100 identities accountable? We have a few videos to make the point. One is from one of our we call them authenticity enterprises, and this tries to get the attention of bankers,
Mm.
because they do have a massive synthetic identity problem. So if you can just buy 100 phones and be 100 different people, and your biometrics check out on each phone, absolutely, it's a problem. And that, in fact, is the situation we have today. You can go out and buy a cheap mobile phone and be a new person, and your biometrics are absolutely rock solid. However, in the system done right, the license plate system, remember, you can have as many cars as you want, but they all have to have a license plate. Same with our identity certificates. You can have as many license plate credentials. And by the way, unlike another car, each one is free. You don't pay for incremental, at least right now. We're still looking at that business model, so maybe I should keep my mouth shut about the cost of each one. But they're cheap. They're certainly a lot less than a new Maserati.
Right.
And so, yes, you can have as many license plate certificates as you want, but they're all tied to something called a foundational certificate, which is like your birth certificate. Just like your driver's license is tied to your birth certificate, and your car's license plate is tied to your driver's license. Again, you don't advertise your birth certificate. You seldom use it. That's the way the foundational certificate works. It's seldom used. It is used to generate new license plate certificates. And I also want to mention that I mentioned signing emails. Okay, there's a catch here. The catch right now is that emails are digitally signed through something called S-MIME. There's a protocol called S-MIME, and unfortunately, that requires that the certificate have the email address in it. It would be very nice if we revisited the S-MIME protocol so that your email address did not have to be in the certificate. You can have the same accountability. It can be done. It's just a different way of addressing the problem. So I used phishing as an example, and I need to add that caveat right now. But for authentication, for commenting on blogs, for all the things you do on the net, your license plate credential makes you accountable without disclosing your identity.
So I want to ask another simple question. What happens if the system that has that link between the license plates and our true identities, what if that gets hacked and that gets leaked out?
Well, I'm glad you asked. The identity database is in what's called a certification authority. Every PKI, this is an example of PKI, puzzle pit infrastructure. Every PKI, part of it is the certification. And it has a record of all of the public numbers, not private numbers. If done right, some of them generate the key pair centrally and distribute it. And that's the wrong way and should never be done that way. But the public big numbers are in the certification authority's database. Ours has no identity information. The only person who can map that public big number to you, to your identity, is your attestation officer. So what the central database has is the address, the public key of your attestation officer, not your public key. I mean, not your name, not any identifying information about you. Yes, it has your public big number, which doesn't disclose anything. And the mapping between that public big number and your foundational certificate is not kept there either. There's no mapping between the entry in the database and your identity. So it's an identity database without identities.
So how does that work where this attestation officer needs to basically, with a court order, say, okay, this public number is this person. There's got to be a system that they're logging into and accessing this link between those two numbers or two pieces of information.
It's in their device. It's in their possession. I enrolled this person on such and such a date. Yes, this is in my roster of people that I have enrolled. I've checked their identities. I attested their identities. By the way, your attestation officer is a Virginia remote online notary. They carry civil and criminal liability for any official acts of theirs, including, attesting to your identity. And that mapping is in their possession. It's a local database. They can see who that public key represents, but they're not to disclose it. That's where the mapping exists, in there locally with them.
Okay. So would that local group, company, whatever, however it manifests, would they be vulnerable?
Always an individual.
Okay.
Always.
And the individual, what's going to be your personal information and link is on their phone, on their computer at home, at their servers. What would that look like?
It's a laptop.
Mm-hmm.
It's a laptop with call it a secure laptop.
Mm-hmm. And the assumption is that you'll have many of these, so all this data would be distributed, not necessarily all in one place.
Right. And you get to choose your attestation officer.
Hmm.
So you have a relationship with your attestation officer. It's a human relationship, one-on-one. This is the person who is responsible for keeping my identity confidential, and nobody else. There's no place. There's no mapping anywhere else in the world. There is a provision for If this attestation officer is incapacitated, there is a provision for their work to be transferred to a substitute, a backup.
So, Wes, if there's a court order and there's a clearly, this person on the internet broke the law in a clear manner, that solves a certain set of problems. What about just bad behavior, misinformation, things that are not clearly illegal, but seem to be having a bad influence? Does this concept idea solve that as well? Does it help us to find people who are not acting in good faith? Or is really this all about people who have clearly broken the law?
Okay, so the answer is yes, it addresses the problem. But when I say it addresses the problem, it is something other than your license plate credential.
Mm.
So here's the thing that we have. I will say that the set of assumptions that we have fallen into that has led us astray, and that is that started with the whole information wants to be free. The beginnings of even before the web, there was something called Gopher, sort of a free web. Um, on the internet, no one knows you're gone. Well, okay, we have a space like that in the physical world too. It's called outdoors. We have called the internet, we call it, I guess somebody has recently said, hey, Wes, we still call it that. Anyway, we call it the information highway or the information superhighway. It's a roadway system. It delivers packets from point A to point B. Observes a standard worldwide protocol. Red means stop, green means go. It's a roadway. So what would we do in the physical world if we found ourselves hanging out, living, holding our meetings, keeping our files, letting our kids hang out by the side of a busy roadway? What would we do? I think the answer is we'd pretty quickly find a way to get indoors, to get the protection of this thing, the collection of accountability spaces called building. Where are the buildings? Well, no, we don't have buildings because the internet is freedom. Yeah, well, okay, outdoors is freedom too. Sometimes we want our typical use of a roadway, of a highway in the physical world is to go from indoor space to indoor space, building to building. Not 100% of the time, but that's typically how we use roadways. Why is it different online? I have no idea, other than I watched it evolve. I was there through the evolution, and it was this notion that this wonderful new thing should only be used in an unconstrained way. Well, there are things that you want to do in a constrained way. You want to, in a building, you tend to know who's in a room with you. That's the purpose of a building, other than keeping the rain off your head.
Let me play the devil's advocate here for a moment.
Sure.
To me, it seems that there are a lot of people who want to be anonymous and don't want a license plate. And then on the other hand, there are businesses that will make more money and be successful in this anonymous environment. So having both a consumer and a provider both enjoy this completely anonymous environment, that's what gives it life.
No one is saying that you have to have this. You can certainly live your life outdoors, live off the grid, and no one is saying that's not allowed. But I want to mention that we think of relying parties as being institutions and governments and big business. No, we are all relying parties. We all rely on the identity claims made by others. This is, and when we get defrauded as individuals, it's by another individual typically. Um, we are all relying parties, and we think that we have a means to maintain your anonymity, but make sure that those that you rely on um, are accountable.
So what you're saying basically is that, if you want to chit chat and you're not putting yourself in any kind of risk, that's fine. You can be outdoors. But if somebody's asking you for money or anything that can damage your reputation or anybody else's reputation or create any damage, you should come indoors and have a proper transaction.
That's right. You should have a residence. You should have an online residence. What is a residence? Think about it. What's your home? Isn't it a social network of sorts? It's where family and friends get together, um, and you need to have a right and need to be there. And typically, it's when you are present that you allow guests in, but not always, not 100% of the time. You may have a cleaning person that comes in your absence. So residence, a clubhouse, office. If you picture any kind of building, the equivalent exist online in digital space, and actually there's an in between kind of space called a public accommodation. So if you think about retail stores and banks, I love the bank. You're a super secure space, but anyone can walk. In fact, convicted bank robbers have bank accounts and are allowed to walk into bank lobbies. So, so there's outdoors, public accommodation, indoors. Indoors, everything has an ACL, access control list. You are identified by your PCN, your public key. No one needs to know the identity behind that, but you are accountable there. Or you may have a space where you may build a clubhouse where you say, no, I want to be able to know your name. To be in my clubhouse, I want to know your name. You say, well, my name is Joe Jones. And you say, okay, I would like to have a license to know that for sure. So I would have, and we have this thing called MOI, my own information. This is your personal information vault. It's built partly on the W3C solid system, solid pod, and partly our own additions to it. But let's say you have a clubhouse, this person wants to join. You say, here in this clubhouse, we all have a license to know each other's real names. That means I want to go to your MOI and under license, under an agreement not to use your name for any other purpose, I want to know your name. And then, of course, you have your choice of saying, well, I don't want you to have access to I'll tell you my name, but I'm not going to give you access to that item in my MOI. Okay, well, you can't join the club.
That's so interesting, this concept of that there's environments with differing levels of trust. And you're really opting into, do I want to be part of this environment? And then I'm both receiving and giving that trust by definition of agreeing to join that community.
It's exactly like the physical world. There's no difference. See, that's the funny thing. There's this assumption that if you're doing something to alter the way digital space works, it must pervade the whole internet. All 4 billion people.
Right.
It must work that way for all of them. No, not at all. Your building is going to be different from my building. You might have a residence, an office, plus a clubhouse for your chess club. You may be own a publication, and so you own a whole village with buildings inside of it. It's just exactly like the physical world. Look out your window to see how it works. It needs no more explanation than that. Just look at the physical world. There's your model. Outdoors is for everybody. Outdoors works the way it works everywhere worldwide. That's outdoors. You have roadways outdoors. They're pretty much the same everywhere in the world. If suddenly some law change in the protocol made green stop and red go, then you'd have to change the whole world to make that happen, which, that's somebody else's problem.
Right.
It's not the problem of a real estate developer. We have one of our enterprises. It's called Abix Properties. It's a real estate development firm. Develops digital buildings where our entrepreneur there will be happy to build a digital building for you and manage it for you. It works just like this real estate.
Wes, such a great conversation, and I barely noticed that the time flew by and we're out of time. So that brings us to my last question. A lot of our audience are youngsters kind of choosing their next steps in the career. If you think back to 20-something-year-old Wes, what would your advice be?
Ask to look at our authenticity enterprise business plans, because you can be a CEO of an enterprise that brings the benefits of authenticity to your target audience. I hesitate to use the word franchise because it carries certain legal baggage, but essentially that's the business model that we use.
Wonderful. Wes, thank you so much for joining today. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Ari. I had fun.